right, gentlemen, I've created a dealer's choice. It's almost like a game show. You can choose leave the EU, France. NATO is bad. Putin didn't do anything on our elections, and Crimea. Your choice, Malcolm Nance.
Oh, I get to choose one?
You do. Well,
yeah.
Choose more than one.
Well, I could choose them all because there's a reason all of this is coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And I wrote an entire chapter about it. You know, Donald Trump is a spy's dream. I mean, he is just the perfect malleable character. But Spy Master in Chief Vladimir Putin has clearly got something over on Donald Trump. And I'll say it right now. He is in debt to Moscow, and he is paying that debt off to Moscow. But in 2013, he had a meeting at the Nobu restaurant for 2 hours with the top 12 richest oligarchs of Russia. And when he walked out of there, he was spouting Moscow's line. He is still spouting Moscow's line. So when he goes to the Swedes and say, oh, you're not a member of NATO, but you participate from time to time, and the United States should be like that too, he means it. The Russians have told him that. When he says, break up the European Union, Macron, let's do a private deal, he means that because the Russians have told him that it's good. The Russians are his base, and he will never betray his base. And he is more than willing to betray his oath of office. He's already done it several times.
Yeah, and betray Crimea and say they should be able to be in Russia. So if you're talking about debt, Jason, we now know that Paul Manafort, who was his campaign chairman, was in debt to the tune of $10 million, a loan from one of these Russian oligarchs named Oleg Deripaska. An affidavit unsealed Wednesday also disclosed Deripaska had financially backed Manafort's consulting work in Ukraine.
Yeah, there's a lot of rubles there, kind of going back and forth. And this is a thing I think is also important. You also mentioned sort of this upcoming summit, right? And we've already discussed, and Malcolm, everybody knows this, that everyone is terrified of this summit from an American security standpoint because we can't trust anything that comes out of this man's mouth, right? We have no idea what kind of information that Donald Trump will say just bragging to Vladimir Putin. He may give him the knock list and tell him where all the spies are because he wants to prove how tough he is. The other thing is we have to remember, and this is why this is dangerous, the Russians have already gotten their return on the investment, right? I mean, at this point, a summit is really just an opportunity for Vladimir Putin to stunt and flex on the United States and say, look what I got, because there's not much that's actually going to get accomplished one way or another. So I think the country needs to be aware that when the president is setting up these meetings with Kim Jong-un and with Vladimir Putin, it's not to do anything other than assuage his own ego. He wants to create a new alliance of not just oligarchs, but dictators across the world that will make him feel better about it.
And the technical term for that is the axis of autocrats.
Right.
Vladimir Putin is crafting autocracies all throughout Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. He's got the government of Austria, has signed agreements with United Russia. They are almost an alliance. The Czech Republic, Italy tried to do it in France, Poland. Look, this is not going to end well for us. Democracy is not in retreat. Democracy is under direct attack, and it comes partially from the White House itself. Donald Trump, it wants to be that other autocrat. He feels that being an oligarch and being a person who can rule without the constraints of rule of law that George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison put in place is far better. And there is a pool of money, clearly, that he admires amongst the Russian elite oligarchy that he just couldn't get with his own effort. And you know what? Like I said, he doesn't seem particularly interested in the national security of the United States.
So, Jason, here's the problem with that, is that the founding fathers that put together this country, imperfect though it is, did build in what they believed would be a check on a rogue Article 2 power. It's called the Article 1 power. It's Congress. But at the moment, it is completely supine.
Well, look, when every single other branch of government has abdicated their responsibility to actually do checks and balances, I've said this for a long time, looking at this president, his behaviors, activities, the Constitution was not written for just a debauched human being. They had a naive assumption that we would eventually, whereas we might elect liars, we might elect dishonest people, we might elect rude people, but we would not elect someone who fundamentally doesn't love the United States of America. And that's what we have right now. And if Congress doesn't want to do anything to stop him, and if the Supreme Court says deuces, Kennedy decides he wants to leave and leave the country to a bunch of white nationals who want to pass the Muslim ban every 15 minutes, there is nothing we can do except vote as much as we can this fall and make sure the margins aren't slim, because that's when other people will kind of come in and mess up the numbers.
Joe Scarborough said in an op-ed last year, which I thought was brilliant, where he said the Founding Fathers did believe that at some point a populace put into power by the mob would come in there and start ruling like a tyrant. But he never thought that the Article I powers, that Congress would surrender themselves to be a politburo, like the communists, right? A rubber stamp policy organization who will just, do slave as devotion like Saddam Hussein's crews, right? And just let him do whatever he wants to the Constitution of the United States.
Well, the people who have not surrendered to this, though, Jason, are the Europeans. Yeah. It's been made very clear to Donald Trump, I believe, or at least to the press, right, that the European powers, the Western powers who remain, France, Germany, those who are still hanging on, are simply going to, sort of look away from us.
Right.
Do what they need to do together and try to hold the alliance. And in an economic sense, that actually could be harmful to the United States.
It's going to be incredibly harmful to the United States. We've seen it with these tariffs. We've seen it with these sanctions. Germany is still the economic engine of Europe. They don't want to talk to us anymore. Our largest trading partner is actually Canada. It's our largest unguarded border. It's a problem if we can't get along. The same thing happens with England. And mark my words, this Sunday, if Emmanuel López Obrador gets elected in Mexico, we're not going to have friends down there either. Yeah. Okay, that's going to be a far-left president in Mexico who's going to be very, very aggressive about any of these sort of...
has to be aggressively against Trump because remember, he has his own national interest to show he's
exactly.
strong as well.
And last point. The Russian strategy is very clear here. They've written about it. They've created doctrine about it. They are here to break the Atlantic Alliance. They use the phrase Atlanticist, like globalist, as an insult. The Washington, D.C. to the European capitals alliance that has existed since the end of World War II, that we lost millions of people to defend, they intend to break it, use Donald Trump to re-engineer it, and that axis will go from Moscow to the European capitals to America as a subordinate organization.
I think at this point, having now talked about this with you guys for years, I understand that Donald Trump wants that. What I don't understand, Jason, I'm sorry, is why Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are okay with that.
Because they're not going to be affected. Because we talked about, they'll be foot soldiers in Gilead. They're fine, okay? They're perfectly fine with this new world that's going to be created. And I go so far, and I wrote about this last week, enough of the Democrats don't care because they don't fear what he's bringing because they don't think because Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi aren't terrified because they don't realize that a panel like this is the most dangerous thing to this administration. And they don't see that if they don't do something to fight, if they keep bringing butter knives to knife fights with this administration, we will all end up suffering down the road. No one will escape
When you're not at risk, it's easy to tell people to calm down. And that is unfortunately the truth. Jason Johnson, Malcolm Nance, I think we're all quite terrified right now. We appreciate talking to you guys. Thank you very much. Tonight's Last Word is next.